Panel. Ambassador Mark Ginsburg is a former U.S. diplomat, former deputy White House senior advisor, and now a senior advisor with the Counter-Extremism Project. And William Ogborn is also a former U.S. diplomat and now a global risk consultant. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Ambassador, regardless of the president's move here with canceling this flight, why was Nancy Pelosi thinking that it's okay to abandon the country during this time, this crucial time, and go away effectively, as the president's saying, making sure that there's no resolution possible regarding this government shutdown? I mean, is it a little bit tone deaf for Pelosi to have been away in Hawaii over the holidays? Then you had some Democrats in Puerto Rico recently, and now to be gallivanting around the globe. Regardless of the president's move here, which we'll get to, wasn't this just a bad move on her end?
You know, I usually hate to criticize my fellow Democrats, but this was quite inappropriate. The fact that Nancy Pelosi was not only planning to lead the delegation, but to stop in Brussels, of all places, which is okay, for what? For what purpose? I mean, everybody would want to visit the troops, and no one wants to stand in the way of supporting our troops. But the idea that she would do this and lead this delegation at a time when there's such a magnifying glass on every move that she is making, to me, suggests that she needs a good PR advisor.
Yeah, the Brussels trip was allegedly to have some kind of NATO-related meetings. We'll get into that aspect. I want to bring William into the conversation because, William, if Pelosi had gone on this trip, she would have guaranteed that 800,000 federal workers would not receive their second paycheck because she wouldn't have been here to negotiate any kind of deal. So how can there be a compromise or any kind of negotiations if both parties aren't actually showing up to talk?
Well, I mean, it's difficult already to get them to both in the room at the same time. And definitely if one is out of town, it's not going to happen at all. And that's also, I think, why the president canceled his trip, because you can't negotiate if you're not there.
Right. Well, do we give him credit for canceling Davos and canceling his delegation's trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos?
I don't want to give any of them credit for anything right now. There's 800,000 people who are not getting paid, plus all of the fallout from that, plus the fact that there's no one on the Democratic side who seems to be willing to authorize efforts by both Republicans and Democrats to try to forge some sort of compromise, given the fact that at this point in time, everyone who you sit down in Washington and talk to will say, well, there's already a wall. What's the big deal about building some more of this wall? Why about a compromise about that? All of us, it's almost like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We all know what the solution looks like, but we can't get the people responsible for making the decisions to get there.
Wow. If you're putting it on a par with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, that makes me even less hopeful that there could be a resolution.
Well, I'm not hopeful at all. I mean, there's no progress at this point.
Oh, William, we had Pelosi disinviting the president from delivering the State of the Union. The president canceling her trip, as we said, many viewing this as retaliation for that. Some, including Senator Lindsey Graham, calling both political stunts sophomoric, tit for tat. Is it time that both parties grow up a little bit over here? What do you make of this?
I don't think you're going to see any kind of grown-up in the room at this point. I wouldn't even be surprised if you see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now jumping in, because if there's anyone that goes tit for tat with Trump on Twitter, it's Alexandria. So do I see an end for this in sight? I just don't. I don't think Pelosi wants to give the president a win, even if she would come to the table and say, okay, we'll do DACA and we'll give you $4 million for the wall, or maybe just $3 million. I think the president would probably make that deal, but she doesn't want to make a deal because she thinks 2020, Trump doesn't have a wall, he's gone. And so she's going to dig in her heels. And Trump's just the kind of president that's like, I don't need to negotiate. I'm not going to worry about it. You've got to come to me. You're already hearing a little bit of the moderates, the new moderates in the freshman class of Democrats saying, hey, why aren't we at least getting in there and talking? So it's not that no one is talking. There certainly are talks on the Hill in terms of, hey, we need to be doing this, but it's just that leadership is not willing to budge right now.
Ambassador, you're someone that has obviously traveled and met with several the countries and dignitaries. Now, the president said that this was just a public relations event. Not to say that public relations and relationship building isn't important, but is it detrimental in any way for Pelosi and the Democrats to miss this very quickly? Is this going to have repercussions on foreign policy in any way, shape, or form?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I watched Adam Schiff earlier, who's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. The trip obviously had certain substantive goals in mind, and particularly to talk about what's going on in Afghanistan, the funding that Congress gives, as well as meeting with the Egyptian president to discuss terrorism.
Hold that thought, Ambassador. We'll pick it up after the break. Stick around.
Brace yourself for your daily dose of news. I'm Jeff Smith. Join me every day for a fast-paced breakdown of major international stories with an emphasis on live reporting, an analysis of news you need to know. We'll track the headlines quickly, expertly, in a dose you can handle.
Every story has multiple layers, and with the fast-paced, constantly changing headlines, we take you deeper. Breaking down the day's main events from angles you might not expect. I'm Tracy Alexander. Join me for Perspectives.
Perspectives. There's more than just one view.
I'm David Schuster. On Stateside, we bring you the most important stories around the globe and across the United States. From war and peace to politics, law, technology, and culture, we cover it all. And we do it with experience and journalistic integrity. Our news has a pulse, and this broadcast makes a difference. Join us on Stateside.
You're watching Clearcut, coming to you live from New York City. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Makori. President Trump wants the U.S. to update its missile defense system. The president delivering an address at the Pentagon today, and he says the goal is to detect and destroy any missile launched at the U.S. anywhere, anytime, and any place. And part of that plan involves deploying new technology to space.
We will recognize that space is a new warfighting domain, with the Space Force leading the way. My upcoming budget will invest in a space-based missile defense layer. It's new technology. It's ultimately going to be a very, very big part of our defense and obviously of our offense.
The president singled out North Korea as a potential missile threat. The program could also counter new strategic missiles unveiled by Russia earlier this year. Well, meanwhile, in Syria, there are reports of intense airstrikes in areas held by ISIS. Watchdog groups in the eastern part of the country saying that those strikes got stronger overnight into Thursday morning. Those watchdogs say that they appear to be connected to ongoing operations against ISIS in the Deir el-Zor region near the border. And the fighting comes a day after a terror attack in northern Syria killed 4 Americans and at least 11 others, 2 American service members among the dead, but the Pentagon has yet to release their names. ISIS claiming responsibility for that attack. Let's bring back my panel, former Ambassador Mark Ginsburg and former U.S. diplomat William Ogborn. And joining us from the West Coast is Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kampfer, a retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and now the president of KIP, a strategic risk management firm. Thanks for being back with us. Hal, I'd like to kick things off with you. As we're seeing the president announcing a new, more aggressive space-based missile defense strategy to counter threats from North Korea and Iran. He says this is needed to compete with those advanced weapon systems being developed by the likes of China and Russia. In your opinion, how essential is it that the U.S. does this?
Michelle, we have to do it. And he's really kind of articulating something that's been going on for a very long time, although somewhere in his rhetoric, I think there was a decision point on some systems that they've been working on, not something I think they're going to share publicly, but probably stuff tied to what we call ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance systems. Putting reconnaissance or intelligence surveillance systems in space is not new, but there is some new advanced stuff that we have to do, particularly looking at some of these things like hypersonic cruise missiles and things like that the Russians have been talking about, and of course the threat of North Korea.
Ambassador, as Hel mentioned, the Russians have these new hypersonic glide vehicles, at least they're claiming to have them, and they say that they fly 20 times faster than the speed of sound, hence hypersonic, that they can't be detected. China is also developing something similar. Does the U.S. currently have the technology to handle this?
That's a very good question. Several months ago, the Vice President unveiled this so-called Space Command at the Pentagon. And the fact of the matter is that from just public evidence so far, it is quite certain that the Russians are almost engaged with a space race against us. It sort of harkens back to, remember Sputnik in the 50s? We're now engaged in another space race with the Russians and the Chinese because their technology has been increasingly focused on ways to interdict U.S. missile defense capabilities that are going to pose a threat to the United States by China and Russia.
There has been some democratic pushback against the idea of deploying more assets to space, or the Space Force, as the president calls it. Do you think that that's mostly a partisan ploy because it's coming from the president, or you're saying that there is a legitimate need for the U.S. to step up to counter other countries, both physically and even just from an ideological perspective, to put it out there? If Putin's going on TV saying we've got this, you kind of expect the president of the U.S. to come out and say, well, we've got one better than that.
Well, it's not just the Russians are doing that in space. They're also doing with cruise missile technology in Europe, which is why the United States announced that it's going to withdraw from a European integrated missile defense treaty with the Russians. Putin has made it very clear that he intends to use whatever resources he has to best the United States, both with cruise missiles and in space. That poses a threat, and I watched Senator Markey of Massachusetts, who sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, call this another Reagan Star Wars misadventure. And frankly, I think that given where the Russians are right now, we have to take it seriously.
Right, we do indeed. Let's focus on Syria now. William, we had that bombing yesterday, claimed by ISIS, killing around 19 people, including 4 Americans. William, do you think that this attack in Syria should impact the process of withdrawing U.S. troops, or the decision to withdraw U.S. troops?
I do not see that as impacting that decision at all. Even Vice President Pence came out the other day, was talking about how the withdrawal will go forward. They're looking at other ways to combat ISIS. We're seeing, you saw the airstrikes tonight. So they're going to go ahead with withdrawal. How fast that is the question. But as of now, we looked at this bombing. It was more of a splinter cell type bombing, or somebody coming in from Syria or Turkey in order to bomb this. And it wasn't at the front line of where ISIS is in the region. ISIS does not have command and control anymore. And we are just working on whittling that territory down. That does not include any cities or any villages as well. So the withdrawal will go forward. It's just a matter of how that's going to look and how fast, because we will continue to have the ability to strike.
The idea of this withdrawal is very controversial, and this attack is just bringing that conversation back into the spotlight. William, do you think that the U.S. should be withdrawing its troops from Syria?
I believe we should be withdrawing because what our goals are in the region can be accomplished diplomatically and through kinetic activity that we can bring to bear from any of our 20 different platforms in the region. We are not going to be able to get rid of Assad, and we are not going to take over part of Syria and try and build a new democracy in the middle of the desert. We've already been down that road. We see how that works. The withdrawal will go ahead as talked about earlier.
It will, but should it? You say it should, Ambassador Ginsburg. do you believe the U.S. should be withdrawing its troops?
No, not until there's an actual physical vanquishing of ISIS. There's still significant parts of the territory in the South Euphrates River Valley that are still under control by ISIS. And moreover, you know, it's one thing for us, Michelle, to militarily withdraw, but there are at least 5,000, the Counter-Extremism Project has counted, over 5,000 foreign fighters that are traversing around Syria right now that have, in effect, coalesced into small cells, could be responsible for that suicide bombing that took place in Manbij. But our concern is that even if you pull out of the territory, you still haven't really mopped up those ISIS fighters that are still lurking around Syria.
Hal, does a withdrawal negate those advances made against ISIS?
Well, Michelle, I don't think it negates it exactly, but I think it should be conditions-based. I mean, you have to look at the targets. You have to look at basically attrition of whatever forces they have remaining. But also you have to look at those individuals, those foreign fighters, identifying who they are and making sure that we've eliminated them as being a threat. There's a lot of things that we have to do. It doesn't mean we don't have the intent to withdraw, but there are some conditions and some things on the ground, if you will, that need to be in place before we withdraw all of our forces.
William, go ahead. I know you
Michelle,
wanted to make a point
I'd just like to point out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I respect the ambassador, but at the same time, there's no ever defeating ISIS. We're trying to fight an idea at this point. So even if we vanquish them entirely from any territory in Syria, there are still going to be splinter cells. There's still going to be small cells out there that are going to try and strike. It doesn't matter if it's us. It could be the Kurds. It could be the Turkish forces. It could be the Russian forces there. It can be the Syrian forces. There's so many forces. There's a 7-layer onion there. There's no end of ISIS as an ideology. It continues to go on. So then the question becomes just when is enough that we can rely on our partners in the region as opposed to us having to do all the heavy lifting?
I agree with you. I agree with you on that respect, if I may, Michelle.
Please.
What I'm really talking about is significant groups. For example, the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, are holding almost 20,000 ISIS fighters. If we pull out, what is going to happen? Are these people going to be released into the wild? It's my concern is that as long as American forces are there, not only do we need to basically destroy the caliphate territorially, but we have to at least do the mopping up operation of significant numbers of ISIS fighters that we know are under the control of the Kurds and that we know that are lurking in places that can be attacked. And I agree, absolutely, we can never really solve the problem of ISIS in Syria, but at least let's do as best as we can while we continue this withdrawal.
Hal, what do you make of those strikes last night? Do you think that this is in response to that attack by ISIS that claimed, as we said, 19 lives, including 4 Americans?
Michelle, it might be. I think there was some time-sensitive targeting. What I'm thinking is that when that attack took place, that there was a lot of review of various targets. They were looking for movements of equipment, individuals on the ground. Could be some signals intelligence that they were looking at, and they had some opportunistic targeting, and they moved very quickly to put ordnance on those targets. And that's where the American presence makes a huge difference. The Kurdish forces have said this many times. Our ability to use supporting arms, our ability to bring in close air support and hit those targets with the right ordnance at the right time, it's unique, and it's something that they can't replicate, and honestly, most military forces in the world have a difficult time coming close to the United States in terms of how we do that.
Hal, thank you so much for your analysis. Hal Kampfer, Ambassador Mark Ginsburg, and William Ogborn, thank you all for your input.